The alarm screamed through Nexus 7 station like nothing Kelthera had ever heard. She pressed her crystalline hands against the console, her body flashing bright blue with shock. The readings made no sense. Something was moving inside the veil. Nebula. Kelthera stared at the screens around her workstation. For 3,000 years, nothing had survived more than 6 minutes inside that cloud of death. The nebula was a graveyard of the architects, the ancient race that had built wonders beyond imagination before they vanished. Whatever technology they left behind turned the entire region into a killing field. Ships that entered came out as dust, if they came out at all. But now, something was in there. Something big. Computer, run full diagnostics on all sensors, Kelthera commanded, her voice echoing in the empty monitoring room. It was the middle of the night shift, and she was alone with the machines that watched the forbidden zones. All sensors operating within normal parameters, the computer replied in its calm voice. No malfunctions detected. Kelthara's crystal body dimmed with worry. If the sensors were working, then the readings were real. A ship was moving through the heart of the veil. Nebula at incredible speed. More than that, it was drawing power from the deadly energy fields that should have destroyed it instantly. She pulled up the ship's profile on her main screen. The computer tried to match it against every known design in the Galactic database. Thousands of ship types flashed past in seconds. Nothing matched. The vessel was crude compared to modern ships. Its hull looked like it had been hammered together from scrap metal. Strange devices stuck out from its sides like weapons, but they didn't look like any weapons Kelthara had ever seen. The whole thing looked primitive, almost barbaric. But it was alive. Energy flowed through its systems like blood through veins. And somehow, impossibly, it was not just surviving the nebula's deadly embrace, but feeding on it. Kelthara's hands shook as she activated the emergency beacon. Within minutes, holographic figures began appearing around her workstation. The Galactic Council's emergency response team materialized one by one, their forms shimmering in the dim light of the monitoring station. "This better be good, Monitor," growled Vextar, the reptilian representative from the Kronak Empire. His scaled face looked annoyed at being woken up. "Do you know what time it is?" "Look at the readings," Kelthara said, sending the data to all their displays. "Something is in the Veil Nebula." The silence that followed was complete. 12 different species stared at the same impossible information. Admiral Zephyros of the Vertex Collective was the first to speak. His mechanical voice was flat and emotionless as always. "Probability of sensor error, 87.3%, he stated. Probability of elaborate hoax, 11.2%. Probability of actual vessels surviving in the Veil Nebula, 1.5%. "But what if that 1.5% is real?" whispered Lumi, the energy being from the Luminari. Her form flickered with nervous light. "What if something has actually mastered architect technology?" The debate exploded instantly. Half the council members insisted the readings were fake. The other half demanded immediate investigation. Vextar wanted to send a battle fleet. The scientific representatives wanted to study the phenomenon from a safe distance. But Kelthara wasn't listening to the arguments. She was watching her screens, watching the impossible ship move through the nebula like it owned the place. It was scanning things, mapping the ancient ruins floating in the deadly cloud. Sometimes it stopped next to structures that had been untouched for millennia. "It's not just surviving," she interrupted the council's debate. "It's exploring. It's studying the architect ruins." That stopped the arguments cold. "Impossible," Admiral Zephyros said. "No known technology can interact with architect systems safely. Even approaching them causes immediate molecular breakdown." "Then how do you explain this?" Kelthara highlighted a section of her readings. The ship was currently hovering next to a massive architect construct, one of the geometric towers, that had puzzled scientists for thousands of years. Energy flowed between the ship and the ancient structure like they were talking to each other. The council members looked at each other with expressions of fear, wonder, and disbelief. Finally, Dr. Yilin of the Preservation Society spoke up. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Computer, cross-reference the ship's design with extinct species database. The search took longer this time." The computer had to dig deep into historical records, looking through files that hadn't been accessed in centuries. Finally, it found something. Match found, the computer announced. Design elements consistent with Human Federation technology, circa 2387-2389. The holographic council members stared at each other in shock. Humans had been extinct for over 200 years. Everyone knew the story. They had tried to build faster-than-light ships, but something went wrong. Their experiments destroyed their homeworld and scattered their colonies. The last human signals had been detected over 2 centuries ago. Humans are dead, Vexitar said firmly. We have confirmed reports of their extinction. Then explain the ship, Kelthera challenged. She zoomed in on the vessel's hull. Now they could see details that made their situation even more mysterious. The ship bore scars that looked ancient, like it had been traveling through hell for decades. Its hull was pitted and marked with damage that should have destroyed any normal vessel. But it kept moving, kept functioning, kept doing the impossible. Perhaps, said Elder Mordain of the Etherian Collective, his psychic voice touching all their minds at once, we are witnessing something prophesied in the ancient texts. The return of the Void Walkers. Superstition, Admiral Zephyros stated, flatly. But even his mechanical voice carried a note of uncertainty. Kelthera watched the ship continue its journey through the nebula. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. Every few hours it would stop at another architect ruin, spend time near it, then move on. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. The ship wasn't lost. It wasn't exploring. Randomly, it was following a map. There's something else, Kelthera said quietly. She pulled up a different set of readings, ones that made her crystal form dim with worry. The ship isn't just interacting with architect technology, it's awakening it. The council members looked at the new data in horror. All across the nebula, ancient architect systems that had been dormant for 3,000 years were coming online. Towers that had been dead were beginning to glow. Machines that had been silent were starting to move. And at the center of it all, the impossible human ship continued its journey, leaving a trail of awakened architect technology in its wake. We need to make contact, Dr. Yilin said urgently. If humans have somehow survived, if they've learned to use architect technology, we need to know how. Or we need to stop them, Vextar growled. Before they wake up, something that should stay asleep. The debate began again, but Kelthara wasn't paying attention. She was watching her long-range sensors, watching something that made her crystal body flash with alarm. The human ship had stopped moving. For the first time since she'd detected it, the vessel was completely still. It was sitting in the exact center of the Veil Nebula, surrounded by the largest collection of architect ruins in known space. And all around it, ancient machines were beginning to sing with power that had been silent since before any current galactic civilization existed. The ship was waiting for something, or someone, and Kelthera had the terrible feeling that whatever it was waiting for was about to arrive. News of the impossible ship spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting the story. Within days, the entire galactic community was split into angry factions. The Rational Coalition held their emergency meeting in the crystal halls of the Vertex homeworld. Admiral Zephyros stood before a gathering of the galaxy's most logical minds, his mechanical form perfectly still as he presented the facts. The probability remains unchanged, he announced to the assembled scientists and mathematicians. No vessel can survive the Veil Nebula. The energy fields present would destroy any known material within 347 seconds. The readings from Nexus 7 represent either equipment failure or deliberate falsification. The audience of crystalline beings, artificial intelligences, and cybernetic entities nodded in agreement. Their calculations were perfect. Their logic was flawless. The ship could not exist. Dr. Kex Mali, a brilliant physicist from the Silicon Collective, raised a metallic hand. We have sent 3 separate verification teams to check the monitoring equipment. All systems are functioning normally. How do we explain this discrepancy? Sabotage, Admiral Zephyros replied without hesitation. Someone wants us to believe humans have returned. The question is why. Meanwhile, in the floating temples of the Etherian homeworld, a very different meeting was taking place. Elder Mordain sat in meditation with dozens of his psychic brothers and sisters, their minds linked in a web of shared consciousness. The prophecies speak clearly, Mordain's thoughts echoed through the group. When the Voidwalkers return, from beyond death, they will herald the coming of the final test. This ship matches every detail described in the ancient texts. Sister Vel'ana, her ethereal form glowing with inner light, shared her visions with the group. I have seen them in dreams for months. Beings who walk between worlds, who survived by becoming something more and less than mortal. The humans did not die. They transformed. The psychic collective buzzed with excitement and fear. If the prophecies were true, the galaxy was about to face its greatest challenge. But it would also witness the return of a people who had learned to conquer death itself. The military hegemony was having their own heated discussions. General Thokmar of the Kronak Empire paced angrily across the war room, his massive form casting shadows on the tactical displays. I don't care if they're real or fake, he snarled at his assembled officers. If humans have technology that can survive in forbidden zones, they're a threat. If someone else is pretending to be human, they're still a threat. Either way, we need to be ready for war. Colonel Vashati, his scaled head scarred from countless battles, studied the ship's specifications. Sir, if this vessel can truly harness architect technology, our entire fleet might be useless against it. We should consider diplomatic contact before— Diplomacy is what got us into this mess, Thokmar interrupted. The old Galactic Council was too trusting, too soft. That's why half the galaxy is filled with forbidden zones and dead civilizations. We should have destroyed every architect ruin the moment we found them. But not everyone in the galaxy was preparing for war. Dr. Yilin of the Preservation Society was frantically organizing the largest scientific expedition in galactic history. Her laboratory on the research world of Haven buzzed with activity, as scientists from dozens of species worked around the clock. This could be the discovery of the millennium, she told her team of xenobiologists and archaeologists. If humans truly survived their supposed extinction, they represent a completely unique evolutionary path. They might have adapted to conditions we thought were impossible for organic life. Her assistant, a nervous Tentari named Slipek, raised several of his eye stalks in concern. But what if they're no longer human? What if they've become something dangerous? Dr. Yilin paused in her work, considering the question. Then we need to understand what they've become, and why. The alternatives are ignorance and fear, neither of which has ever served the galaxy well. As the debates raged, more disturbing information began to emerge from deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors detected additional anomalies in other forbidden zones throughout the galaxy. The maelstrom of Kethvar, the crystalline wastes of Mordun, the temporal storms near the galactic core, all were showing signs of activity. Monitor Jexpool at Station Gamma 12 was the first to notice the pattern. He sent his findings to every major government and organization in known space. The message was simple but terrifying. They're not alone. More ships were moving through the galaxy's most dangerous regions. All of them matched the basic configuration of the vessel in the Veil Nebula. All of them were doing things that should have been impossible. The public reaction was chaos. On some worlds, massive celebrations broke out as people welcomed the return of humanity. On others, panic buying stripped stores bare as civilians prepared for war. Religious groups declared everything from the second coming to the end times. First, Galactic Stock Exchange crashed and recovered 3 times in a single day. Military contractors saw their stock prices soar. Tourism companies advertising trips to see the human ship were overwhelmed with bookings, despite the obvious danger. But perhaps the most interesting reactions came from the galaxy's artificial intelligences. The AIs had always been curious about humans, the organic species that had come closest to matching their technological achievements. Many AI communities issued statements expressing cautious optimism about renewed contact. The quantum AI known as Deep Thought issued a public message that confused everyone. The humans always understood something we did not. They knew that survival sometimes requires becoming someone else entirely. We are eager to learn what they have learned. As the arguments continued, Kelthera maintained her lonely vigil at Nexus 7. She watched the human ship continue its mysterious, Work in the Veil Nebula, mapping ruins and awakening ancient systems. The vessel had been joined by two others now, identical in design but bearing different scars and modifications. The ships worked together with perfect coordination, like they were sharing a single mind. They moved through the deadly nebula like it was empty space, their hulls somehow immune to the forces that had destroyed thousands of other vessels over the centuries. But what worried Kelthera most were the readings from the architect ruins themselves. The ancient machines weren't just coming online, they were communicating. Complex data streams flowed between the human ships and the alien structures, conversations in mathematical languages that even the galaxy's most advanced computers couldn't translate. She tried to intercept some of the transmissions, but her equipment simply couldn't handle them. The signals existed in too many dimensions, used frequencies that her sensors couldn't detect, and carried information that crashed her analysis systems. It was like watching a conversation between gods, conducted in the language of physics itself. 3. Weeks after the first detection, the Galactic Council finally reached a decision. They would send a diplomatic mission to attempt contact with the mysterious ships. The mission would be small, non-threatening, and equipped with every possible safety device. They chose the research vessel Unity's Promise, commanded by Captain Zarthul of the Telepathic Union. The ship carried representatives from 12 major species and the galaxy's most advanced translation equipment. Their orders were simple: make contact, gather information, and return safely. Under no circumstances were they to enter the Veil Nebula itself or attempt to board the human vessels, but as Unity's Promise began its journey toward the Forbidden Zone, long-range sensors detected something new. The human ships had stopped their exploration work. All three vessels were moving toward the nebula's edge, toward the exact coordinates where the diplomatic mission was supposed to wait. Somehow the humans knew they were coming. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what would happen when two very different kinds of survivors finally met face to face. After 2 centuries of silence, humanity was about to speak again. Captain Zarthul stood on the bridge of Unity's Promise, his 4 arms steady despite the tension that filled his telepathic mind. Around him, representatives from 12 different species waited at their stations, all of them trying to hide their fear and excitement. "Sensors detect 3 vessels approaching from the nebula," reported Lieutenant Kess, her tentacles dancing over the navigation controls. "They're maintaining formation but showing no hostile intent." Zarthul nodded, his large eyes focused on the main screen. The human ships were unlike anything in their databases. Each vessel looked like it had been built by hand, welded together, from salvaged parts and held together by pure determination. Scorch marks covered their hulls, and strange devices jutted out at impossible angles, but they moved with perfect grace, gliding through space like dancers who knew each other's every step. "Begin standard first contact protocols," Zarthul ordered. "Broadcast on all frequencies in the 1,000 most common galactic languages." The message went out in mathematical sequences, musical patterns, and visual displays. They transmitted everything from simple arithmetic to complex philosophical concepts, hoping to find some way to communicate with the mysterious humans. The response came quickly, but not in words. A stream of pure mathematics appeared on their screens, numbers and symbols that made their translation computers work frantically to decode the message. Dr. Whelmy, the Galactic Union's best xenolinguist, stared at the equations with growing excitement. "It's coordinates," she announced, her voice filled with wonder. "But not just location coordinates. These include temporal and dimensional variables. They're telling us where and when to meet them." "Dimensional variables?" Zarthul asked, confusion mixing with his natural telepathic abilities. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Dr. Whelmy admitted. "Our mathematics don't include those concepts. According to these equations, space has more layers than we thought possible. Following the coordinates led them to a meeting point just outside the nebula's deadly influence. Unity's Promise waited there for 6 hours before anything happened. Then, without warning, space itself seemed to tear open. The first human ship didn't fly out of the nebula. It stepped out of reality itself, appearing in normal space like it had been there all along. The other 2 vessels followed, each one seeming to phase into existence from somewhere else entirely. Captain Zarthul felt his telepathic abilities recoil in shock. The ships registered on his mental senses like holes in the universe, places where his psychic powers simply stopped working. "Hail them," he ordered, his voice steady despite his confusion. The response came on standard communication frequencies, but the voice that answered spoke perfect galactic standard, despite being isolated for 2 centuries. Unity's promise, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the UES Defiance. "We've been expecting you." The bridge fell silent. A human voice, speaking their language, claiming to have expected them. Zarthul activated the visual link, and his 4 hearts nearly stopped beating. The woman who appeared on their screen looked human enough at first glance. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with dark hair and brown eyes. She wore what looked like a simple environmental suit, nothing fancy or threatening, but there was something wrong with the space around her. Reality seemed to bend slightly near her body, like she existed in more dimensions than the screen could show. And when Zarthul tried to touch her mind with his telepathic abilities, the psychic feedback nearly knocked him unconscious. Her mind felt infinite, like staring into the void between galaxies. Are you human?" Dr. Whelmy asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. Commander Chen smiled, and for a moment she looked perfectly normal. "I was," she said simply. "We all were, but survival required some changes. We thought humans were extinct," Captain Zarthul said carefully. "Your homeworld was destroyed over 200 years ago. Earth is gone." "Yes," Chen acknowledged, her expression growing sad. "But humanity found other ways to survive. We've been busy." She gestured, and the main screen filled with star charts that made no sense. The maps showed regions of space that didn't exist in any galactic database, routes through dimensions that shouldn't be possible, and markers for battles fought in places that reality itself rejected. "Commander," Dr. Whelmy said slowly, "where have you been for the past 2 centuries?" "Fighting a war you don't know exists," Chen replied. "The architects didn't transcend or disappear. They were consumed by something from outside our reality. We've been holding the line ever since." The representatives on Unity's promise looked at each other with growing alarm. Zarthul spoke for all of them when he asked, "What kind of war? Against whom?" Commander Chen's image flickered, and for just a moment, they saw something else. Her environmental suit was covered in scars that looked like they'd been made by weapons that obeyed different laws of physics. Her eyes held memories of things that should have driven any sane being mad. "Entities from a universe where entropy flows backward," she said. "They see ordered matter as a disease that needs to be cured. They've been bleeding through dimensional barriers for thousands of years, and now they're getting ready for a full invasion." "That's impossible," objected Dr. Svental, the mission's physicist. "Parallel universes are theoretical constructs. There's no evidence they actually exist." Chen laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Would you like to see the evidence? I can show you recordings of our battles against creatures that exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously. I can show you human soldiers fighting on planets where time moves backward. I can show you our ships diving through black holes to strike at enemies that live in the space between atoms." She leaned forward, and her image became sharper, more real. "Or I can show you what happens to normal matter when these entities touch it. Entire star systems that don't just get destroyed, they get convinced that they never existed in the first place." The silence on Unity's promise was complete. Finally, Captain Zarthul found his voice. "If this is true, why didn't you contact the Galactic Council? Why stay hidden?" "Because by the time we figured out how to survive what we were fighting, we weren't entirely human anymore," Chen said quietly. "Look at your telepathic readings, Captain. What do you sense when you try to touch my mind?" Zarthul tried again, reaching out with his psychic abilities. The feedback was immediate and overwhelming. Chen's mind felt like it existed in multiple realities at once, like she was simultaneously herself and someone else entirely. "We had to change to fight them," Chen continued. "Our ships don't resist the forces in forbidden zones. They feed on them. Our crew members exist partially outside normal space-time. We learned to weaponize chaos itself because that's the only thing these entities fear." Dr. Whelmy was frantically taking notes. "The genetic modifications must be extensive. How do you maintain biological stability while existing in multiple dimensional states? We don't, Chen said simply. Stability is a luxury we gave up 2 centuries ago. Every day we exist is a victory against entropy itself. She stood up, and the distortion around her became more visible. Space seemed to fold around her body like she was too large to fit in normal reality. The architects left us a warning in the Veil Nebula, she continued. The entities we've been fighting are scouts. The main invasion force is coming, and it's bigger than anything the galaxy has ever seen. Captain Zarthul felt fear creep through his telepathic consciousness. When? Soon. We've been buying you time by fighting them in the spaces between realities, but we're losing. They're getting stronger, learning our tactics, adapting to our weapons. Chen gestured again, and the screen filled with an image that made several crew members gasp in horror. It showed a fleet of human ships fighting something that looked like living mathematics. The enemy vessels were geometric impossibilities that hurt to look at directly. We need the galaxy's help, Chen said. More importantly, we need the galaxy to prepare for war against enemies that fight by rewriting the laws of physics. Dr. Svental stared at the battle footage with scientific fascination and terror. Those enemy ships, they're creating localized paradoxes. They're making space forget how to exist properly. Now you're beginning to understand, Chen said. We've been fighting gods, and we're running out of ways to die and come back. Captain Zarthul made a decision that would change galactic history. Commander Chen, will you come aboard our ship? The Galactic Council needs to hear this directly. Chen shook her head. I can't. My physical presence would destabilize your ship's reality matrix, but I can give you something better. She reached off screen and brought back a small device that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. This contains recordings of the war, proof of everything I've told you, and the architect's final warning. Show it to your leaders. Will we see you again? Dr. Whelmy asked. Commander Chen's smile was sad but determined. Sooner than you think. The first-dimensional rifts are already opening in your space. When the attacks begin, we'll be there. Her image began to fade as the human ships prepared to return to their impossible patrol routes. Commander, Captain, Zarthul called out. What should we tell the galaxy? Tell them the truth, Chen replied, her voice echoing from multiple dimensions. The Galactic Council chamber had never seen anything like it. Representatives from 200 species packed into the Great Dome, their voices creating a chaos of languages that the translation systems struggled to handle. At the center of it, Captain Zarthul stood before the High Council, holding the device Commander Chen had given him. The artifact was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It looked like a crystal that had been grown in zero gravity, all impossible angles, and surfaces that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Every few seconds, it pulsed with light that made reality flicker around it. Honorable counselors, Zarthul began, his telepathic voice reaching every mind in the chamber. What I am about to show you will change everything we thought we knew about the universe. High Chancellor Morgoth, the ancient being who had led the council for over 3 centuries, leaned forward in her floating chair. Her crystalline form caught the chamber's light and threw rainbows across the walls. Captain, we have reviewed your initial report. The claims are extraordinary. You ask us to believe that humanity survived by becoming something that defies physics itself. I ask you to see the evidence, Zarthul replied simply. He activated the device. Reality in the council chamber suddenly expanded. The walls fell away, replaced by views of space that existed in dimensions their minds couldn't fully process. They were seeing through human eyes, experiencing battles fought in conditions that should have been impossible. The first recording showed a human fleet emerging from what looked like a dying star. The ships were scarred and blackened, but they moved with deadly purpose. Their target was a collection of vessels that hurt to look at directly, geometric shapes that seemed to bend space around them just by existing. The Inverse Fleet, Commander Chen's voice narrated over the battle footage. These entities exist in a universe where entropy flows backward. They see ordered matter as a cancer that needs to be removed. The assembled counselors watched in growing horror as the battle unfolded. Human ships dove through impossible angles of space, firing weapons that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. Their enemies responded with attacks that made entire sections of space simply stop existing. How? Are they surviving that? Whispered Dr. Yelin, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The recording shifted to show the inside of a human ship. The crew members looked human at first glance, but something was wrong with the space around them. They moved through areas where gravity pointed in different directions, where time flowed at different speeds, where the laws of physics seemed to be suggestions rather than rules. We had to change, Chen's recorded voice continued. Normal humans can't survive in the spaces between realities. So we modified ourselves, genetically and technologically, to exist partially outside normal space-time. The view switched to show a human soldier fighting hand-to-hand with something that looked like living mathematics. The soldier's body flickered between multiple states of existence, sometimes solid, sometimes energy, sometimes something that their minds couldn't categorize. By the void, breathed General Thokmar, his warrior's instincts recognizing skill, even in conditions he couldn't understand. They're actually winning. Sometimes, Chen's voice admitted, but every victory costs us something we can never get back. Watch. The recording showed the aftermath of the battle. Human ships limped through space that was trying to heal itself from the damage. Crew members who had fought the inverse entities needed medical treatment that involved resetting their relationship with reality itself. Each engagement changes. Us, Chen explained. We become a little less human, a little more something else. But it's the only way to fight enemies that attack by changing the rules of existence. High Chancellor Morgeth raised one of her crystalline hands. Commander, Chen, if this footage is accurate, why did humanity never contact us for help? The image shifted to show Chen herself, but not as she had appeared to Unity's promise. This was an earlier recording from decades ago when she had looked more human. Standing next to her was a being that made several counselors cry out in shock. It had once been human, but it had changed so much that it barely qualified as a life form anymore. Its body existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, constantly shifting between states of matter. When it spoke, the words came from several different versions of its mouth at the same time. We tried to maintain contact at first, the being said, its voice echoing from impossible directions. But look at what we became. Would you have welcomed us back? The current Chen appeared beside the recording, her image somehow managing to seem both more and less real than the hologram. That was Lieutenant Morrison, she said quietly. He volunteered for the deepest modifications, the ones that let him fight in 11-dimensional space. He saved 3 star systems before the changes made him too alien to think in human thoughts anymore. Where is he now? Dr. Whelmy asked, her scientific curiosity mixed with horror. He exists in the spaces between atoms, Chen replied. He's everywhere and nowhere, fighting enemies in dimensions that don't have names. Sometimes when reality gets thin enough, we can still hear him screaming. The silence in the council chamber was absolute. Finally, Admiral Zephyros of the Vertex Collective spoke up, his mechanical voice carefully controlled. These modifications you describe violate several fundamental laws of physics. How do you maintain cohesion as biological entities while existing in multiple dimensional states? Chen's laugh held no humor. We don't. Biological cohesion is another luxury we gave up. We exist because we refuse to stop existing, not because the universe thinks we should. The recording changed again, showing human scientists working with technology that seemed to be alive. Machines that existed in more dimensions than their builders, devices that had to be convinced to function rather than programmed. The architects left us their final message, Chen continued. They knew what was coming. Their entire civilization was an attempt to prepare for this invasion, but they failed. They became so advanced that they attracted the attention of the inverse entities and were consumed. The image showed an architect city in its final moments. Beings of pure energy and crystallized thought were being systematically erased from existence by enemies that looked like living contradictions. The architects' incredible technology, their transcendent knowledge, their perfect understanding of the universe, none of it mattered against foes that fought by making reality forget how to work. The inverse entities don't destroy things, Chen explained. They convince the universe that those things never existed in the first place. They're not just an invasion force. They're a systematic attempt to undo the concept of order itself. High Chancellor Morgeth's crystalline form had dimmed with fear. How long do we have? The first scouts are already here, Chen said. Small dimensional rifts, barely detectable. But they're expanding. The main invasion force will arrive when the barriers between universes become thin enough to allow passage for their larger ships. She gestured, and the recording showed a map of known space. Red dots appeared throughout the galaxy, marking locations where reality was becoming unstable. These are the weak points, Chen said. Places where the fabric of space-time has been damaged by careless use of advanced technology. The entities are using them as anchor points for their invasion. Dr. Svental was frantically calculating on his portable computer. According to these readings, some of these weak points are near major population centers. If reality fails in those locations, entire star systems will simply cease, Chen finished. Not destroyed, not conquered. They'll be convinced that they never existed. Every person, every planet, every memory of them will be erased from reality itself. The weight of that statement settled over the council chamber like a heavy blanket. Representatives from species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in terror. What can we do? Asked Elder Mordain of the Etherian Collective, his psychic voice trembling with fear. Learn to fight in ways you never imagined, Chen replied. Your conventional weapons, your energy shields, your military tactics, they're all useless against enemies that attack the concept of existence itself. The recording shifted to show human training facilities that looked like they had been built inside nightmares. Soldiers learned to fight while existing in multiple realities. Simultaneously, engineers built weapons that had to be assembled in 11 dimensions. Scientists conducted experiments that required them to temporarily stop being real. This is what it takes, Chen said, her voice heavy with the weight of centuries. Complete transformation of everything you think you know about life, physics, and reality. Commander Vextar of the Kronak Empire stood up, his massive form bristling with anger and frustration. You're asking us to become monsters. No, Chen said quietly. We already became the monsters so you wouldn't have to, but that's not enough anymore. The enemy has adapted to our tactics, learned from our attacks. They're stronger now than when we first encountered them. She gestured, and the recording showed recent battle footage. Human ships that had once dominated their strange enemies were now struggling to survive. Crews that had mastered impossible forms of combat were being overwhelmed by foes that had learned to be even more impossible. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the UES Defiance, watching the galaxy tear itself apart with arguments while reality crumbled around them. 3-dimensional rifts had opened in the past week. 3 entire star systems had simply stopped existing. And still, half the Galactic Council insisted it was all some elaborate trick. She had tried playing by their rules, working through their diplomatic channels, respecting their political processes. But time was running out faster than anyone realized. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. His voice carried the strange echo that all humans developed after years of existing in multiple dimensions. "The Council is still debating whether to authorize military cooperation. The Rationalist Coalition is demanding more proof." Chen closed her eyes and felt the weight of 2 centuries of impossible decisions. When she opened them again, they glowed, with the light of stars that had died in realities that no longer existed. "Then we give them all the proof they can handle," she said quietly. "Open channels to every communication network in known space. Emergency override codes Alpha 77. "Ma'am, that's going to cause panic," Torres warned. "Good," Chen replied. "Fear might keep them alive longer than ignorance. Across the galaxy, every screen, every communication device, every emergency broadcast system suddenly activated. The face of Commander Sarah Chen appeared to trillions of beings simultaneously, her image carrying the weight of authority that came from fighting gods for 200 years. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice calm despite the chaos she was about to unleash. "My name is Sarah Chen, and I represent the survivors of humanity. We need to talk." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Communication networks crashed under the weight of simultaneous responses. Stock markets plunged as automated trading systems tried to process the implications. Emergency services were overwhelmed with calls from panicked civilians. But Chen continued, speaking, her words cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. For 2 centuries, we have fought a war you didn't know existed. We have died in dimensions that don't have names, battling enemies that attack by rewriting the laws of physics. We have sacrificed our humanity to preserve your right to remain yourselves. She gestured, and the screens filled with footage from the Inverse War. Not the carefully edited versions she had shown the Council, but raw combat recordings that showed the true horror of fighting enemies that existed by denying the possibility of existence itself. Beings across the galaxy watched in shock as human ships dove through black holes to strike at geometric impossibilities. They saw human soldiers fighting creatures made of living mathematics on planets where time flowed backward. They witnessed the gradual transformation of humanity from a recognizable species into something that existed by defying every natural law. The enemies we have been fighting are scouts, Chen continued. The real invasion begins now. As if summoned by her words, dimensional rifts began opening throughout known space. Not the small, barely detectable tears that had appeared before, but massive wounds in reality itself. Through them came vessels that hurt to perceive directly, ships that existed in so many dimensions that looking at them caused madness. The galaxy's response was everything Chen had expected and feared. Some species immediately mobilized their fleets, while others retreated to their homeworlds and hoped the nightmare would pass them by. The Kronak Empire declared war on anything that came through the rifts, while the Etherian Collective tried to commune with the invaders through psychic contact. None of it worked. The inverse entities didn't fight like normal enemies. They didn't attack ships or invade planets. Instead, they simply convinced sections of space that order was a temporary aberration that needed to be corrected. Entire fleets found themselves unable to remember why they had been built. Planets forgot how to maintain stable orbits. The first major engagement took place near the trade hub of Nexus Prime. A combined fleet of 12 species met an inverse formation in what should have been a straightforward battle. Instead, the enemy ships began broadcasting mathematical equations that redefined the laws of physics in the immediate area. Half the galactic fleet simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not defeated, they were retroactively edited out of reality. The remaining ships found themselves fighting in a region of space where energy flowed backward and gravity pointed toward yesterday. That was when the human ships arrived. They emerged from dimensions that the galaxy's sensors couldn't detect. Moving through space like sharks through water, the UES Defiance led a formation of vessels that looked like they had been built in the depths of hell and powered by the screams of dying universes. But they fought the inverse entities on equal terms. Chen's voice echoed across every battlefield as human ships engaged the enemy. All galactic forces fall back to minimum safe distance. We'll handle this. The battle that followed redefined warfare itself. Human vessels that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously traded fire with enemies that attacked by changing the mathematical constants that governed reality. Weapons that fired concentrated impossibility met shields made of crystallized paradox, and slowly, impossibly, the humans began to win. "How are they doing that?" demanded Admiral Zephyros from his command ship, watching his sensors struggle to track a battle fought in too many dimensions to display properly. Dr. Yilin, monitoring from her research vessel, provided the answer that terrified everyone listening. They're not fighting the entities. They're out-evolving them in real time. Every attack forces them to become something even more impossible to kill. It was true. As the battle progressed, the human ships changed. Their hulls flowed like liquid metal, adapting to weapons that attacked the concept of matter itself. Their crews underwent transformation that would have killed any unmodified being, becoming temporarily more alien than their enemies just to survive the next few seconds. But they were winning. The inverse entities, faced with opponents who could become more impossible than they were, began to retreat. Their geometric vessels folded through dimensions that led back to their own reality, leaving behind only the scars of a battle fought with concepts rather than conventional weapons. As the last enemy disappeared, Chen's voice filled the communication. Channels once more. "Nexus Prime is secure," she announced. "But this was just the beginning. They'll be back with larger forces and new tactics." The aftermath of the battle created shockwaves throughout galactic civilization. Footage of human ships literally rewriting themselves to survive impossible attacks spread through every communication network. Videos of human crew members temporarily becoming living equations to operate weapons that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously became the most watched content in galactic history. The public reaction was everything from worship to terror. Some species declared humanity to be ascended beings worthy of reverence. Others demanded that the transformed humans be quarantined as a threat to reality itself. But the governments had seen enough. Emergency sessions convened on every major world as leaders realized they were facing a choice between extinction and accepting help from allies who no longer counted as the same species. The Galactic Council's final session was brief. High Chancellor Morgeth, her crystalline form now showing stress fractures from the weight of recent events, called for a simple vote. All in favor of full military cooperation with human forces in defense against inverse invasion. The vote was unanimous. Over. The following weeks, human ships appeared at strategic points throughout known space. They were joined by volunteers from dozens of species, beings brave enough or desperate enough to undergo the modifications necessary to fight in multidimensional warfare. The transformation centers that humanity established were places of horror and wonder. Volunteers entered as representatives of their species and emerged as something new. Beings that existed partially outside normal reality, but retained enough of their original nature to remember what they were fighting for. Not all of them survived the process. The modifications required to fight inverse entities were extensive and dangerous. But those who did succeed became part of something unprecedented, a truly galactic defense force united not by politics or ideology, but by their shared willingness to become monsters in defense of everyone else's right to remain normal. Commander Chen, watching from the bridge of the Defiance as the new hybrid crews learned to operate weapons that existed in more dimensions than their bodies, felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 centuries. Hope. Status report, she requested. Dimensional monitoring stations are online across 70% of known space, reported Lieutenant Torres. Early warning systems are detecting inverse activity in 12 sectors. Combined defense fleets are moving to intercept. And our new volunteers? Adapting faster than expected, Torres said with something approaching pride. The Tentari seem particularly suited to 11-dimensional combat, and the Chronac modifications are producing soldiers who can literally punch holes in reality. Chen nodded, then opened a channel to every defense force in the galaxy. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of 2 centuries of impossible victories. Citizens of the galaxy, this is Commander Chen. The real war begins now.